Us to hear from none other than our esteemed chief guest, Mr. T.V. Narendran. As we all know, he is the global CEO and MD of Tata Steel Limited, and we're honored to have him amongst us today. Thank you, sir, for joining us. Mr. Narendran has over 32 years of experience in the mining and metals industry. As the CEO and MD of one of the largest steel companies in the world, he's overseen the organic and inorganic growth of Tata Steel over the past few years. This includes both greenfield expansions and fresh acquisitions. Mr. Narendran is currently on the board of several Tata Steel companies, both as chairman and member. He is also the chairman of the board of governors of XLRI Jamshedpur and a member of the executive committee and the board of the World Steel Association. He was the co-chair of the Mining and Metals Governors Council of the World Economic Forum from 2016 to 2018. He's also the president of CII and the president of the Indian Institute of Metals. That's a lot of things he's doing. Mr. Narendran was involved in the journey of the Deming Prize for Tata Steel with a focus on creation of customer and societal value as a means for creating corporate value. That resonates very well. He gave a speech at the International Conference of Quality in Tokyo in 2014 and encourages executives to share their experiments at national and international conferences. Mr. Narendran is a mechanical engineer from NIT Trichy and did his MBA from IIM Kolkata. It was Calcutta when he did it, I guess. Starts with a K now. He is the recipient of Distinguished Alumnus Award from both these institutes and is a Chevening Scholar, and he also attended the Advanced Management Program at INSEAD, Fontainebleau, France. Please join me in welcoming on stage Mr. Narendran as we hear more from him. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Good morning to everyone. Good afternoon if we have people online from Japan and elsewhere. Mr. Janak Mehta, thank you so much for inviting me. I think he invited me some 2 months back, so I couldn't say no. And I also want to thank Dr. Krishnamurthy for his leadership for the last few decades. He may not be here today, but I think his blessings have made sure that we are all here today. It's a privilege, as Mr. Janak Mehta said, Tata Steel, led by Dr. Irani at that time, has been at least at that point in time in the forefront of the quality movement. And that's a legacy that we continue to carry forward. It's something that, in some sense, helped Tata Steel live through the challenging times in the 90s, because India was just about opening up. As is not uncommon, many people had written off Tata Steel at that time. Tata Steel has been written off many times since it started in 1907. So 90s was another decade when we were written off, but we bounced back, largely because of the leadership commitment to quality and the way Tata Steel transformed itself. And that legacy has continued, whether it was Mr. Muthuraman after that, Mr. Nerurkar after that. I think we've continued to run with that journey. So when Mr. Janak Mehta invited me to talk today, I think he wrote to me, he wanted me to talk about the leadership role in quality. So I'm going to spend the first part of my speech on that, more from a point of view of a student, because when I joined Tata Steel 32 years back, we were just about at the beginning of this journey. So my observations and reflections on Tata Steel's journey over the last 30 years and what are the lessons, and a number of which Mr. Janak Mehta referred to in his speech as well. And the second part is, when I look at the theme of the conference, Rebooting Quality for a Competitive India, I think that's very relevant, because we are also reflecting in Tata Steel about how do we reboot Tata Steel, how do we use the fundamentals of the quality movement that has got us so far to build for a future which is very different from the past. And I think some of what I'm going to talk about resonates with what Mr. Janak Mehta alluded to. So if you step back and say, what is the role of leadership in quality? I think we saw many, many examples of it in Mr. Mehta's presentation. But one thing is very clear: without the leadership commitment, without the leadership passion, it's not something you can delegate. There are many things in an organization you can delegate, but not the quality movement. So leadership commitment, leadership passion is, to me, the starting point. And if that is not there, don't even waste your time on the journey, because it's not going to happen. So I think from a Tata Steel point of view, as Mr. Mehta said, Dr. Irani made this famous trip. It's part of the Tata Steel folklore that Dr. Irani went to Japan and came back and started the quality movement in Tata Steel. And so that commitment was there. He understood the need. This was, I think, a few years before India opened up, or India had started opening up. And he knew that Tata Steel at that time, which was a very profitable company, successful company, been around since 1907, needed to change. Otherwise, we wouldn't survive. And a lot which happened in the subsequent decades was about driving that change. So Dr. Irani was committed, the leadership of Tata Steel was committed, because over a period of time, he got the entire leadership of Tata Steel to understand and appreciate this. And this tradition continues. I think 10 years back, I was overseas. I came back to India, taking on a leadership role in India. And the first thing I was sent to was the Juice training program in Japan for 2 weeks, and spent time there. Though I was familiar with a lot of what we were doing, but it was a refresher program. It was, because to me, this is a subject where you are always a student. As I think Mr. Mehta talked about the fact that just getting a Deming Prize doesn't mean that that's the end of the journey, because the world is constantly changing, the context is changing. One of the fundamentals of quality is to continuously be a student and to keep learning and improving and changing. And I think, so irrespective of how successful you are as an individual, as a professional, as an organization, I think one should have the humility to accept that there's so much more to learn. The world around us is changing. And so the leadership commitment and the leadership humility to accept that however good we are, we need to change is, to me, a starting point. And getting, not just a CEO, getting the entire leadership to buy into that, exposing them to these kind of programs, exposing them to companies who attained a certain level of quality maturity, seeing for themselves what is the benefit that we can get out of it, and having them drive the journey is, to me, the first point. The second point is to create an architecture for it. Large organizations, it can't just work with the CEO and the top 20 people wanting to drive quality. You need to create that architecture for it. You need to create the structure for it. And again, Mr. Mehta referred to how it's done in Tata Steel. People like Sunil Sinha, Avnish, who are all respected professionals in their own areas, were pulled into the quality movement, and it was made their full-time job for a period of time. So even from the late 80s, early 90s, we always had a very strong team, which Tripti, who's sitting here, all people who've been in the line businesses, running businesses, pulled into quality for a few years, because they get the respect of the people they're going to convert. If you only send somebody who's just been a quality expert but never been on the field, never been on the shop floor, never been out there, it's very difficult to convince the people you want to convert. So when you pick up people from the business, make them the experts, they can drive quality like nobody else. So Tata Steel has always had the strong quality team, people, professionals who are respected, who have the credibility to push change, who have the credibility to drive quality. They may be experts in their field, make them experts on quality, and they will drive quality like never before. So that, to me, is the second most important point. The third important point is how do you build the capability in the organization? You have a CEO and a leadership team who's committed. You have the quality team who's there full-time, business people who are there. But you need to build the capability of the organization, both top-down and bottom-up. How do you build that capability on the shop floor? How do you train people? How do you make them interested in it? And here, sometimes I find that there is a danger of making it an elitist movement. If you complicate it more than required, you've lost most of the organization, right? If you overdo the statistical quality analysis part, and don't explain to the person on the shop floor in a manner that is relevant to that person, it will never get used, right? Because this is also a danger I've seen sometimes. You over-intellectualize it, fewer and fewer people buy into it. They think it's for 20 people in the organization to understand the subject to do. I think if you want it to be successful, you should be able to simplify it. You should be able to make it relevant for everyone in the organization, irrespective of where they are in the organization. If they don't see the relevance, they see it as additional work. If they see it as relevant to making their life better, they will do it themselves. You don't have to drive them to do it. So to me, building that capability of the organization and making sure that people on the shop floor, in line jobs, understand the relevance, and it is not something esoteric which the CEO says we should chase, and it's not a certificate you're chasing, but it's about a change of culture, a change of the way you work. I think that's extremely important. And hence it has to be both top-down and bottom-up. Top-down because you need that commitment of the top. It has to be bottom-up because the momentum will come from the bottom. That momentum cannot be just pushed from the top. If it's only pushed from the top, if you take your foot off the pedal, it stops. If it is from the bottom up, it will continue, irrespective of the changes in the organization, irrespective of the leadership changes. Today in Tata Steel, even if I decide that it's not important, it'll take a long time for Tata Steel to stop this journey. Because the organization has momentum. People down the line have momentum. They will think something is wrong with me, right? So I think that is the momentum that needs to be created in the organization, where people down the line think that this is a way of life. It is not something that you do in addition to your job. It is a way you do your job. So I think it's extremely important to create that. The other aspect of this whole journey is goal setting. You know, again, quality cannot be a journey in isolation of what your business is trying to achieve. So the goal setting is extremely important. How do you set goals which are relevant, and how do you use the quality principles to achieve those goals? And those goals need to be broken up to levels which are relevant. It may be about reducing your, complaint settlement time. How do your complaint management systems? It could be about, productivity. It could be about any other metric which is relevant to the person down the line. And how do you set goals which cannot be achieved in normal course, where you will need to push yourself, you will need to use tools which you may not have otherwise, which will force you. For instance, if you want people to look at data, how do you set goals where people can't achieve those goals without looking at the data? And then it becomes a habit of looking at data and analyzing the data. And then you can seed them into different ways of analyzing the data. And you can have different people with different capabilities analyzing data in different ways. So I think there are many different ways to translate this quality movement or embed it in the culture of the organization by very good goal setting processes. And also in this journey, it's very important to, drive something. For instance, in Tata Steel, I remember, it sounds ironic now, but in the 90s, we had a movement around customer first, because we had come through a period where the government decided the steel prices and decided who we could give steel to. From that mindset to say that the customer is who we live for was itself a big culture change in Tata Steel. So there was a movement around customer first, har hal mein. And today it sounds, why do we need to say that? But at that time it was important so that the guy on the shop floor knew why the customer is important. Otherwise the mindset was, this is lower cost to produce, I'll produce it like this. If you say I want it in a certain fixed length, he'll say that means cost is more. But if you say that's what the customer wants, then people need to understand that that's what you need to make. So I think you need to pick those initiatives which bring that focus to the organization, translate it into a manner which makes it relevant for people on the shop floor, and then drive it. So these to me are very important in this journey. Benchmark shamelessly, because oftentimes we look at who is the best in the industry and benchmark. I think that's a limiting way to benchmark. You should do that, certainly. But for many of our processes, you don't need to be limited by your industry. And there's so much, even today, when we look at maintenance processes, we say, why can't we learn from the airline companies, right? They have to have zero failure, right? Because they cannot afford a failure. So how can a manufacturing organization learn from an airline company on maintenance practices, right? Because even for us, there's a failure, the plant stops, right? Lives are not necessarily lost, right? So you can benchmark. I remember in the 90s, we benchmarked on credit management with one of the banks. We benchmarked on complaint management with one of the consumer durable companies, right? Because they were better than others in the industry. There was no point saying we're in the steel industry, so we benchmark with somebody in steel on credit management, because credit management can be anybody else's, core process, right? And then finally, and I think this is also important, is subject yourselves to external assessment. And that's where within the Tata Group, we have the Malcolm Baldrige movement, we have the Deming Prize, the Deming Grand Prize. That's not an end in itself. That's just a way of assessing yourself, because sometimes all of us think in a certain way and we think we have achieved something, still somebody else comes and tells us that no, there's a lot more to do. And we went through that journey. So in fact, when we won the Malcolm Baldrige equivalent, which is called the JRDQB award in the Tata Group, we said, let's apply for the Deming Prize. And obviously we were once again a student, because when we won the award, we thought we were the experts, but we became a student. And that drives humility in the organization, that culture of continuous improvement, the willingness to learn from others, and then subjecting yourself to assessments, taking the feedback, working on it. And that goes on. And that's become part of our habit. At an overall level, you may participate in these assessments. At a more specific levels, you can participate in assessments for those specific levels. On data maturity, you could today participate in an assessment, which is very different from an overall assessment at a corporate level. On HR practices, you could participate in an assessment, which is very different from what is at an overall level. So constantly subjecting yourself to some assessments, not so much with the objective of what is the score I get or what is the certificate I get, but what are the learnings I can get from that? how does somebody outside the organization look at it and see it? It may be very different from the way we see it ourselves, particularly in organizations like ours where many people have spent many decades in the same company, right? It's always good to get somebody from outside and come. So if you do all this, and I think leadership needs to drive this, if you do all this, then you will hopefully have a company which delivers excellence at all points in time. To me, excellence is not about the certificates you get and the prizes you win. It is about how does any stakeholder, that stakeholder may be the community, maybe the employee, maybe the supplier, maybe a customer, whoever, any stakeholder who encounters you at any touch point, any time, should have an experience which tells him this is a quality company, right? I tell my colleagues in Tata Steel, if you look at some of the Deming companies, even in India, if you look at TVS Group, people like Mr. Venu Srinivasan have been driving it. If you visit the shop floor, you know it's a Deming company. Nobody has to tell you they won Deming Prize or Deming Grand Prize, so you don't have to look for the certificate. You walk through the shop floor, you know it's a Deming company. Same with Toyota in Japan or many other companies. So it's not about what you say or the certificates that you present or the accolades that you get. It is about the experience, unsolicited kind of experience that anybody has at any touch point. I remember, about 15 years back when we had acquired this company, Nat Steel, and I went there and we talked about the fact that we had won the GIDQ, which is a Malcolm Baldrige Award, and we were applying for the Deming Prize. One of my colleagues from there visited one of our stockyards and came back and told me, when I visited your stockyard, it didn't seem to me that you are a company which pursues excellence. And honestly, we were all focused on the core operating plants and not at the stockyards, not at the periphery of the organization, right? So, but people judge you based on that, right? People judge you, they say, oh, are you sure? Because this is not what I experienced. Because not everyone experiences your main steel plant or the TQM team or the leadership team. They experience that person who is there in that stockyard or in your sales office or in some processing facility somewhere. And if they don't experience excellence there, they will never believe that you are as committed to excellence as you're saying you are. So this is the part where I wanted to talk about the leadership commitment. Now I'll shift into what I think we need to think about. And I say this because, again, as a practitioner, when I reflect on what does Tata Steel need to prepare for, I've told you what happened in the last 32 years. We are a multi-decade, in fact, we are more than a century old, and obviously we need to think multi-generational. We have people in Tata Steel who are 5th and 6th generation. So we always think about how does the organization shape itself up for the next few decades or next few generations, right? So what is it which is top of our mind, and how is it that we can, in some sense, reflect on using the fundamentals of quality to deal with some of these challenges? Again, some of these challenges Mr. Janak Mehta alluded to in his speech. First and foremost, how do you plan for resilience, right? I think the last few years has demonstrated to us, because traditionally our focus, single-minded focus, has been on efficiency, right? But now, how do you find that balance between efficiency and resilience? If you can get both, perfect. But today, that resilience has become extremely important. And even over the last 10 years, I think the first time it hit many of us was when Fukushima happened in Japan, right? Many supply chains were disrupted, particularly automotive supply chains. So automotive companies, which, for instance, were driving on lean and driving on efficiency, and suddenly found that they were vulnerable to one or two suppliers, not first level, maybe fifth level, right? Because first level, you may have 4 or 5 to mitigate the risk. But at the third or fourth level, if they're all dependent on one factory which is supplying one component which goes to all these 5 suppliers, and it may be a component which the auto company, it doesn't even have a line of sight on, then there is a resilience issue, right? And how do you mitigate that risk? And this has been highlighted multiple times. Thereafter, there was floods in Thailand, which again disrupted the auto supply chains. Over the last few years, it's been the pandemic. Now you have climate events which are disrupting things. You have the semiconductor issue happening just now, container shortage, right? So again, organizations are looking at resilience, and there are different solutions to it. Some people are saying, let's do nearshoring. Some people are saying, let's do China +1, whatever else. But you need to think about how do you find that balance between resilience and efficiency. If you can get both, perfect. But how much of cost will you compromise for resilience? And if you don't compromise, what is that cost of not being resilient? Is that downtime of 6 months more than makes up for all the efficiencies you got over 10 years, right? So I think that is, to me, the first important thing organizations need to think about, and how to use the quality principles and the foundations look at that. The second part which is happening is, the disruptions which are happening in the marketplace, right? Your definition of market is changing. Your definition of customer is changing. If your customer is not disrupted, their customers are being disrupted, right? Today, auto companies are struggling. Are they an auto company? Are they a mobility as a service company? And that has a big difference. Earlier for us, we used to try to, in some sense, supply steel not only to the top auto companies, but to their top selling models, because the steel is approved for a certain model of the car. And if that model is not successful, you spend a lot of time developing steel for a model which is not selling, right? But today, you are looking far beyond that, right? These companies are looking at disruptions in their marketplace. So to me, it's very important to be alert to what's happening, what are the disruptions happening. The definition of competition is changing. Service industry is far more disrupted than the manufacturing industry, but all of us will get impacted in very, very different ways because of the changes that are happening. So how do we, we've all grown up in the quality movement saying customer obsession, how do I deliver? Now, if I don't know who's my customer, if I don't know which is my market, and that is not defined by the product I sell, then one needs to have systems which is sensitive to this, picks it up, responds to it, plans for it. So to me, that disruption in the marketplace is the second thing. The third related is how do we shift from organization which is very strong in a culture of continuous improvement, which we are and which is important, to one which is more breakthrough thinking, breakthrough innovation. Oftentimes, I was telling Mr. Mehta, process-driven organizations are seen as too rigid. They don't change fast enough. They are a slave of the process, but they are important. Those daily management principles are extremely important if day in and day out, you have to deliver a consistent performance in a very disruptive world. But at the same time, that same organization should be able to think breakthrough, because today the world is changing very, very differently, right? So to me, how do you build that? Now, do you build it in pockets in the organization? Do you change the culture in the whole organization? Is it required to do that? How do you find that balance? Just like I said, how do you find the balance between resilience and cost and efficiency? How do you find that balance between innovation and stability? How do you embed agility into a process-driven organization? So to me, these are things which are really at least keeping me thinking, right? The fourth is how do you in some sense deal with a lot of costs which are outside your factory gates, right? I mean, when we talk to the government, we talk about competitiveness, right? But there's only that much of competitiveness which is in our control. That competitiveness is what is within our factory gates. A lot of costs are outside our factory gates. So when I look at the cost of doing business, how do we work on costs which are outside can we mitigate those costs? You can. If railways is a bottleneck in our industry, raw materials, you can use slurry pipelines, you can use multimodal transport, whatever. But you can't solve all problems, right? Or how can you work with government to jointly solve problems? And I think that's where, how can we use some of these principles to work closely with the government, and how can we embed some of this thinking in the government? For instance, customer orientation. How can we get more of that in the government so that we can work together to find solutions which benefit both of us, right? So I think, there is a need when you look at quality, not to limit it to the boundaries of your factory, but also to look at the whole ecosystem and the community, and how can you be a positive force in the community so that the whole ecosystem thinks as you think. And as Mr. Mehta said, if we are looking at how do we reboot it for a greater future for India, for prosperity for all, then we all need to work together. We cannot work in isolation. We cannot solve the problems in isolation. It needs to be done collectively, as a company, group of companies, as a sector and industry, and ultimately with the government. How do you think of quality in the context of inorganic growth, right? Because we've just done some inorganic growth. So you may be a very mature organization. Now suddenly you've acquired an organization which is at a very low degree of maturity on this. They may be having a good performance, but low degree of maturity on the quality movement. So how can you pull yourself to speed? Temptation is to isolate them and say, we are excellent. But you're all part of the same family. You cannot say that I'm an island of excellence when what is relevant is the overall organization which has multiple parts and different degrees of maturity. So when you're looking at organic and inorganic growth and India's economy, which is going to be growing, and companies will grow organically and inorganically, what is your playbook to bring? If it took 30 years for Tata Steel to reach this degree of maturity, can I do it in 30 months in an organization that I acquire? I cannot wait for 30 years, right? Because in the next few years, there'll be other opportunities, other organizations. So, how do you create that playbook? And all that we described that Tata Steel did, how can we compress that and do it faster? So that just like you say, when you acquire a company and integrate it, unlock the synergies and the values, how do you integrate from a quality system point of view, quality processes point of view, people training point of view, capability development point of view, and how do you change the way people think much faster than it took us, right? How do you deal with a transient workforce? We are all, at least I come from an organization which I said is multi-generational. All of us are the first job and the only, or many of us first job and the only job in Tata Steel. No longer the way for youngsters to join us. Our engagement scores and are the lowest for people who've spent less than 5 years. Many more opportunities for them today than when we joined the company. So many more people leave. We were traditionally not an organization which took people at mid-level and senior levels. We've been doing that as well. So how do you, and tomorrow you have a gig worker, how do you plan this in an ecosystem which is like that? So there are complexities there. So you cannot say that, okay, I joined the company, I went through 20 training programs, today I'm where I am. Again, how do you do that in today's environment, where you have people joining at laterals, where you have inorganic growth, etc. Right? So to me, these are some of the challenges that we need to build on for the future. Then you have a data overdose. I mean, when we grew up in quality, getting the data was a challenge. Today you have too much data. It's available in plenty. A lot of the analysis which some people were very good at doing can be done, through algorithms, and the system can do it for you. But how do you translate that analytics into insights? How do you get that in? And I love using a phrase which one of my colleagues in Netherlands used when we were doing the digital transformation. He said it's easier to make a data scientist out of a metallurgist than a metallurgist out of a data scientist, right? Because the data scientist may be excellent with data, but that metallurgist has that domain knowledge. And how do you marry that together? So earlier, if getting the data was a bottleneck, today that's not the bottleneck. The bottleneck is how do you translate that overdose of data into insights which are relevant. All of us know in our own small ways, we are all drowning in our emails, right? Now, it's the same thing. We are all capturing a fraction of the data in process industries. We are capturing a fraction of the data that we generate every day. And we are only analyzing a fraction of the data that we capture. And despite all that, if we've done all these improvements over the last 30 years, then look at the potential over the next 30 years if you really leverage the data that is being churned out. And what is your strategy for that? What is your sensorization strategy? What is your infrastructure that you want to build, etc., etc. So there's a lot of work, which is the industry 4.0, industry 5.0, whatever that we do. How do you build your quality principles into that, leverage it, and use it? So to me, there are multiple challenges as we go forward, which one needs to deal with as you think about rebooting quality and rebooting our organizations going forward. And the last 2 points I want to make is both what Mr. Mehta talked about, climate change and inequality, right? Again, none of this, I mean, you can have excellent organizations, but if we are all in islands, of isolation, where the world around us is struggling with inequality and world around us, and we cannot be insensitive to those problems. In Tata Steel, for most of the last 100 years, we were only in Jamshedpur. And we realized this challenge over the last 10, 15 years as we went and started opening up new sites. And, we saw the need. It's like saying just like we said, the quality movement is not the job of 20 quality professionals, right? Similarly, engaging with community is not the job of 20 people in the CSR team. It is your job. If you're a line manager, business manager, you need to understand what's happening out there. Then you will understand why people think the way they are, right? So we started running sensitization programs so that people are exposed. Because many people are not exposed to poverty. They don't know what poverty is. And poverty is not about not having a car. Poverty is about not being able to have a meal, right? So to me, we don't understand poverty till you really go into the poorest parts of the country. And as Tata Steel, we operate in some of the poorest parts of the country, right? So unless as leaders, as managers, you understand that, you will never be able to appreciate that, right? And then you can think about how can I deliver better outcomes to them? How can I use equality principles to make the same amount of money and resources that we are spending on CSR have a greater impact on the community? And there's so much you can do. Again, using technology. We recently won an award for the work we did in the schools in the poorest districts of Odisha during the pandemic, using technology, right? Our objective in those districts is to make it child labor free, so that every kid is in school, in government schools. This is not about running some fancy schools. It's about working with the existing government schools, with the teachers, delivering better outcomes, so that the parents send their children to school and the children are happier staying in school. So these are the things, again, you can use a lot of the learnings that we have. It's not, nobody has said that these principles can only be used in a factory or in a corporate environment. So how can we use that to deliver better outcomes? And in that space, you see a lot of people who have their heart in the right place, but who have not had the privilege that we've had of being trained on these principles, right? So how can we deliver that, give that efficiency to them or help them deliver better outcomes, right? So I think, and even today, there's so many, I've been sitting in some of these sessions on social entrepreneurship. So many fantastic people out there doing work, being entrepreneurs there. Some for profit, some not for profit, but trying to solve societal problems. So how can we use quality principle to solve those societal problems? And the last thing is climate change. Fundamentally, climate change is about resource efficiency, right? So it is about how do we achieve whatever we have to achieve by using less. How do we plan for reuse? How do we plan for recycle? How do we plan as in design? How do we make sure that our footprint gets smaller and smaller? And footprint is not just about carbon footprint, it's about land, it's about water, it's about biodiversity. So how can we use these principles that we use so well in our corporate environment to solve societal problems, right? And these are big problems, very complex processes. Interdependencies are not so clear. In a corporate environment, we know all the interdependencies. I change the temperature here, I know something will happen there, right? Here we don't know. We are still learning. So how can we use more and more science, our ability to understand these interdependencies? And this is not a problem which can be solved in one country. We are having this issue in Europe, right? I think Europe is ahead of all of the geographies in understanding this problem, having the right policies to deal with it, and pushing corporates to change. Today, the cost of carbon in Europe is 80 euros per ton. It was 10 euros a ton 4 years back, right? So for every ton of carbon that you emit, 80 euros per ton is your cost. Right? We are insulated from all that, but it will come to us sooner than later. But Europe also recognizes the problem can't be solved by shifting the factories out of Europe. That's maybe the best way to solve the problem for Europe, but doesn't solve the problem for the world, and climate knows no boundaries, right? So to me, it's something that needs to be solved across the world. And again, I think some of the principles that we've learned in the corporate environment can be used to solve these far more complex and I would say far more important problems. So I think there's a lot to do. It's a good theme to talk about. While I know the theme is about rebooting quality for a competitive India, I think all of us, it can be defined at a corporate level, it can be defined at a global level, and I think rebooting ourselves to really prepare for the challenges the years ahead is a good way for us to give back to society. Thank you very much for inviting me.